I don't know about you, but it feels like more and more organizations and companies are shifting their virtual engagements to in person. So I wanted to ask our loyal podcast listeners, do you know of an event that a company or association is hosting that would benefit from an in person speech? I teach how to use storytelling to make a greater impact, how to build a greater team, and the habits of high performing individuals. If you have a connection, I'd be honored. My email address is don@donyaeger.com. That's don at donyaeger.com. If you email me, trust me, I'll reach back out to you and will even send you a book to say thanks. I appreciate you. What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community. I'm your host, Don Yaeger, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is John Crowley, Chairman and CEO of Amicus Therapeutics, a company that is dedicated to the development of advanced therapies that treat devastating rare diseases. John's involvement with this industry stems from the diagnosis of two of his children with Pompe disease, a severe and often fatal neuromuscular disorder. In his drive to find a cure for them, he shifted career path from business consulting to biotechnology, which ultimately saved his children's lives. John and his family have been profiled on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and are the subject of the major motion picture Extraordinary Measures, starring Brandon Fraser and Harrison Ford. This guy is big time. We first met when he was the chair of the Make-A-Wish Foundation National Board, and I am so excited to share his story with you today.
What I learned more than anything is to accept loss. That's going to be part of life. People have said, it's okay to fail. Well, you know what? Of course it's okay to fail. In fact, if you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. You're constantly trying to play up to that competition.
John, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, Don, it's great to be here. Certainly with what you've been able to do over the years and sharing so many stories from so many great leaders. I'm just honored to be a small part of it.
Well, you have been an inspiration to me on a dozen levels. We're going to talk about a few of them today. I know you grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, love playing sports. We're going to talk about that. But I want to start with a story that begins in your adult years, famously chronicled in the movie Extraordinary Measures, which we are going to have a link in the show notes to the movie so that people can go and watch it. You were at the time married with 3 kids and had just received your master's from Harvard, working in business strategy consulting when your life drastically changed. It was 1998, and you noticed that your daughter wasn't progressing like other 1-year-olds. Can you share, as a father and as a leader too, of that window and what you learned as you were learning about your own daughter's health?
Yeah, that was a challenging time in life, Don. And on one hand, it was a world of opportunity opening up. But, somebody once told me nature is not cruel, just brutally random.
Hmm.
And I think in some ways, our journey is like many, many other families, particularly with children with rare genetic diseases or with cancers. And what ended up happening, we found that our middle child, our daughter Megan, by about a year of age, wasn't doing the things she was supposed to, pulling up in a crib, taking those first steps. And we went from pediatrician to neurologist, from blood tests to MRI to biopsy to diagnosis. I knew something wasn't quite right with Megan physically. And my greatest fear in those weeks leading up to it was that she wouldn't walk,
Mm,
that he'd tell us she'd be in a wheelchair. We met with a neurologist on Friday the 13th.
mm,
I remember it well. It was in March of 1998. We didn't have Megan with us at that appointment. She was back home. He told us that they had the diagnosis. And what he told us was actually much more serious. She had this rare form of a muscle disease, a muscular dystrophy called Pompe disease. And they were seeing glycogen, a stored form of sugar, in the muscles. And it was destroying her heart, her diaphragm, and all of her skeletal muscles. And he said that she wouldn't live to be but a couple of years old and would get very sick very quickly. I mean, that, the shock of that. And then he looked down in the car carrier where we had our then 7-day old Patrick. And he said there's a 25% chance he has the disease. He needs to be tested too.
mm.
In that moment, life changed.
You were trying to understand what the options were, what you could do. You're a father, you're a take control person. And I'm sure you became frustrated, right? You had a career path, you had to design things you were planning to do. And suddenly, now with this diagnosis and with what was ahead for the entire family, you are having to make choices and go in different directions. Talk to me about where things go from there.
In that moment, maybe even those first couple of hours, Don, we went through a lot of emotions: shock, grief, denial, the anger, all of that. And I think very quickly settled on determination to learn first everything we could about this disease that we'd never heard of. Eileen and I are silent carriers for the recessive gene that could cause Pompe. And even then, there was only a 1 in 4 chance that any of our children would have it. Because we're silent carriers, any of us for maybe a dozen or more rare diseases on average, there's no history in our family. That was kind of the shock part of it. So we had to learn a lot. And I remember even that first night going on to the internet, even before Google existed, and learning and actually reading about some early research that was being done to create a lab made version of the enzyme that the kids were missing because of the genetic defect. And I remember waking Eileen up in the middle of the night that first night and rambling. And she just asked me, "What does it mean?" And I told her, I think it means, Eileen, that there's hope. And that was a really important lesson for me. When you're dealing with any challenge in life, but particularly health crises, and we all meet that health crisis in our life, either individually or as a family, you've got to find that measure of hope. For me, that was just realizing that there were very small numbers, but there were researchers who were beginning to look into the disease. What I wanted to do more than anything in those months and that next year was to learn, to meet people. And I had my day job. We had an enormous amount of student debt to pay down and all the pressures of a young family, 3 young kids. And Megan did get very sick very quickly. And then Patrick shortly thereafter. And we finally found a physician who had an idea and decided to go into business with them, not because that's what I planned to do, but because no one else wanted to. We didn't want to look back years later, particularly if the kids did not survive, and wished that we had done something else, something more.
Wow. Determination. That became the word, that became the motto, that you see this opportunity. You realize the business model didn't completely make sense. And as you said, given everything else you were facing, it may not have been the direction you had ever imagined going, but it was right for you.
Yes.
But even there, it got complicated. This story and the fact that it is so impactful that it would become the movie that it is, it just draws everyone that I've shared your story with into great emotional passion. You then have another big moment where you learn that even though there might be hope, that hope might not be available to you, in part because you had become part of the business.
Yeah, that was a real chance. So, if you fast forward quickly through those 5 years from Megan's diagnosis, the end of 2002, early 2003, the kids got much sicker. I left that job at Bristol Myers to partner with a researcher to start that small company. I took a $100,000 home equity loan and met a payroll with cash advances on Visa and MasterCard. And eventually we were successful and we found some early science that was so promising that we were acquired by a large biotech company, and I went to that company to run their therapeutic programs, including this one. At that point, the doctors told us that Patrick had 6 months to live, Megan maybe a year. And we had seen some early results in children that were really encouraging, life-saving results. And I was so excited. Finally came time to treat our kids. We went to have the kids treated and in a clinical trial, and you have to get not only the FDA to approve it, and they were great, and they did, but the individual hospital review boards have to. And for whatever reason, a hospital review board decided that being an executive at the company prevented me from having my children in a study. That was pretty devastating, as you would imagine. And that was a great challenge. And what I finally did was when it came up to the second hospital review board, I resigned the day before. The program was in a good place, the business had succeeded, and now it kind of rested in the physician's hands and they handled it beautifully well. And on January 9th, 2003, a seemingly long time ago now, Megan and Patrick received the first of those enzyme infusions on what would have been my dad's 63rd birthday.
Oh my gosh. Wow. And fast forward again, just because I want those who are listening to this amazing story and to your journey and your effort and your determination. Megan, that child that you were told would live maybe a couple of years, graduated from Notre Dame.
Yeah, hard to believe it's been 2.5 years now.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, so Megan and Patrick, the medicine saved their lives. It fixed the enlargement of their hearts. Within 12 weeks, their hearts were restored to normal function. For a time, it made them stronger, Megan in particular, but they always needed wheelchairs. They've always needed ventilators to breathe and nursing care. They're still fragile. The disease, thankfully, never affects their mind. So incredibly bright, precocious, and they went through the public schools where we lived in New Jersey. And Megan graduated. Yes, very proud that she made the decision with a little bit of coaxing along the way. Megan always kids around and said, "Oh, my dad gave it. The choice was totally mine. I could have gone to any school I wanted to in South Bend, Indiana. There are three of them. They're all excellent." So, and you know what? She thrived.
Yeah.
Moving that far away, living in a dorm for all 4 years in Ryan Hall on campus at Notre Dame, and watching what became her closest friends and the rector and the RA and people who helped her through. A lot of people taught and helped Megan along the way, but she's also taught and helped a lot of people, many of them without ever knowing that she was helping them. So she graduated with a double major and decided that she'd like to be a social worker. Megan moved down to Chapel Hill, keeping it in the ACC.
Oh, they can use a lot of social work down there in North Carolina.
It's a beautiful town. I said, Megan,
It
even
is.
when she went to Chapel Hill, Don, she still bled blue and gold. For a time, the blue got a little bit lighter, but it was great. And she just finished with her master's in social work degree. She's now a social worker in the Princeton Middle School in New Jersey, working full time with the social work team who supported her 12 years ago.
Isn't that just so powerful? Like life is just wonderful and that it gives you the occasional opportunity to live it out full circle. That's really cool. We've talked a lot in the building of this podcast about the importance of how sports and athletics allows us to make a connection into lessons and things we can learn. There's a nugget that you shared with me in an email about a grammar school gym teacher who went above and beyond and included Megan and Patrick in all the gym activities. That, it's easy for children who might not possess all the physical gifts that others might expect to be sidelined in moments, but great leaders, great people know how to include everyone. You cited this gym teacher as someone that you saw as a great leader because of the way the teacher included the children, even in things as simple as tug of war.
Yeah.
I'd love to call out a little bit about leadership lessons, sports, and what you learned watching that entire process.
Yeah, it was great. It's interesting when we had moved to Princeton in New Jersey, Megan was getting ready to go to school. It was also 6 months before she received that life saving enzyme therapy. So she was also getting pretty sick and pretty weak. I struggled. I didn't, I thought we may have very little time left with the kids. And what are we doing worrying about getting her in school? And Eileen, to her great credit, was adamant that the kids, for as long as they would live, would have as full an experience as possible. And that meant going to school. The school district didn't know exactly what to do with somebody in a wheelchair on a ventilator with a nurse by their side. And they politely and thoughtfully pushed back and didn't think that would be the right environment. And we pushed back as well. And they said, fine, we'll welcome Megan in, we'll make the adjustments for her. And so we had to fight just to get her into the mainstream school. And I just assumed she'd be exempted from gym. She came home that first day and she was excited. And I asked her, what would you tell me about school? And I figured it would be I met my teacher, I met some friends. And the first thing she told me, she goes, I had gym today.
Oh, wow.
You had gym? What'd you do? Oh, we played kickball and I was on the team and they let me run the bases. Megan's wheelchair, even back then, was about 300 pounds, Don. So you could imagine Megan would ultimately turn out to be one of the most fiercest and most popular kids to be picked on the team because no one was able to stop her going around the bases. And then I remember a couple of weeks later, they had a big field day, all class field day. And Megan participated in all the track and field events, and she became the anchor man on the tug of war. And all the other kids, they just tied Megan's wheelchair to the end. And of course, at 300 something pounds, kids aren't budging it. And I remember kids on the other side kind of throwing their arms up and complaining to the gym teacher, Steve Hennessy, Mr. Hennessy, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. You know what, guys? Life ain't fair. Get over it. Blew a whistle and they moved on. What a great lesson for Megan, for kids.
Absolutely.
All of it. So just remarkable experience. And Megan, to this day, I think by nature, and certainly through all the chat, how many times that now young, I would say kid, that now young lady has almost died, and the adversity that she has struggled through in her life and overcome. So many people have played a part in it. And you use that example of an area where you would never think that somebody so disabled as Megan would ever be able to cite her participation in sports as a reason for her tenacity. I actually think it was a small part of it, the lessons for all of us, no matter able-bodied or not.
Life ain't fair. Get over it. Blow the whistle. Move on.
All of us move on. Next game.
Next game. Love it. Today, you serve in this amazing company. You're chairman, CEO, Amicus Therapeutics, and you've overseen the growth of the company. You started with 4 employees.
Yes, our second biotech started in 2005 with 4 employees.
And now you've 500 employees. You're in 25 countries.
That's right.
I mean, it's funny because you resigned your job in order to make sure that that treatment was available to your children. And yet everything about that experience has informed what you've become as a businessman and a leader. Your company, actually, one of its directional goals is really to try to find solutions for those struggling with diseases that impact smaller populations. That sense of purpose, that why that drives you internally, how do you spread it to all of those that get the opportunity to work in the organization?
It's interesting, Don. Another thing you realize in healthcare and making medicines, that what we're trying to do is to give people more time with the people they love, and quality of life. The irony is that sometimes the greatest enemy is time. Getting that medicine in time, developing it in time, getting it into a person, a patient. And in biotechnology, our mission is to make medicines to extend and enhance people's lives. And some remarkable technologies that have been developed in the years and decades past, and even more remarkable technologies that we have today and that will be on the horizon: gene therapy, gene editing, really this golden age of medicine. When you're dealing particularly in rare genetic diseases, mostly affecting children, the mission is very clear. And in some respects, we have an unfair advantage in an area like biotech, particularly our segment of it, in defining the mission. What we need to do, though, is to constantly renew that. You can only focus on, if you will, just one part of the business, whether it's a technology, a program, and you've got to get people excited about constantly renewing that vision and that energy. And that's about bringing new people in. It's about advancing technologies, adding new programs. The vision remains the same. The mission remains the same. The strategies will change. Oftentimes, because you have the foresight to look ahead and to make the right bets on where you're going to focus your time, talent, treasure. And oftentimes because things intervene where the strategies don't work anymore. So for me, it comes down to hiring each individual in the company. And what I describe is the common element across is they have to be passionate entrepreneurs.
Everyone in the company, you need to see them as a passionate entrepreneur.
Yes, and those two words we use very intentionally. Passionate meaning they've got to be mission driven, purpose driven. They've got to be wanting to seek great meaning in their work. They've got to want to live and breathe the life of somebody living with one of these diseases. What I ask everybody in the company is to think with every decision they make, if you had this disease or you were the mom or a dad of a child with the disease, who would you hire? Where would you invest your capital? When would you start a program, stop a program, build a building, whatever it may be? That's the passionate part. You've got to embrace it. The other part is that entrepreneur part. What we do in biotech is really, really hard. We could hire the most brilliant scientists, raise hundreds of millions of dollars, build these elaborate research facilities. And our core technologies, more often than not, they don't work. And you got to go back to the drawing board. So that's where the resilience piece and the tenacity come in. And that's the essence of being an entrepreneur. I don't care if you're a startup working in a cubicle with two people, or you're part of a large company, organization, not for profit, university. It's that mindset of constantly adapting.
Yeah.
Passionate entrepreneurs. Those two words are very intentional.
I love it. I want to get back to a little bit of your sports journey because I know you love athletics, you love sports. I wish I had pictures of little John. I don't.
My mom does.
Your mom does. But I know you played football third grade on to high school. Day one of high school football, there was an adjustment for you. Tell me about that.
So we live in a town called Bergenfield, New Jersey. Growing up with my dad as a cop in North Jersey, my mom having been a waitress and having been blessed to go to some wonderful schools and a great education. I like to say I had a pretty big heart and passion for sports and still do, and perfectly mediocre talents at best. I'm half Italian, half Irish by heritage. I think the Italians tend to sprout pretty early, and I did. I was always kind of average, maybe a little below average size, and a lot of heart and fight. So in third grade, I was an offensive lineman.
Oh my gosh.
By fifth grade, I was a linebacker. And then I was a running back. And then I was a free safety.
Keep moving further and further from the line of scrimmage.
About as far out as you go. So I went out Bergen Catholic High School in New Jersey. Remarkable institution, a great football powerhouse. We had some kids on that team who went, forget about college, they went to the NFL. Bergen that year was ranked number 2 in the nation. And I worked all summer, trained. I was going to come on, try out for the football team. The first day, I kind of went back and forth between defensive back and halfback. And about halfway through the day, we went out for a drill. The quarterback was throwing a bunch of passes. Well, I go out for a little short pass over the middle, maybe 10 yards out, and the senior quarterback threw it, hit the ball on the side of my hand, broke my hand and my finger. I realized a number of things that day. Number one, that I was not going to play football for Bergen Catholic High School. And number two, I probably shouldn't play football at any high school.
And number 3, that quarterback didn't have much touch.
Yeah, I was going to say.
If he was breaking your hand with a pass.
I don't think this was the quarterback's issue. Let's just say that, Don. But he zipped it in pretty good. But I think that was mostly on me. So a lesson learned that, you know what, maybe there are other sports I should think about.
And I know baseball was always important to you, but actually wrestling became your sport in high school.
I did. Again, another sport I was perfectly mediocre at. I tried really, really hard. My one perhaps small claim to fame is I once beat a state wrestling champ in a tournament. We were not a great team back then. And the guy ahead of me was sick and in the weight class above me. And the coach said, well, John, I want you to wrestle up a weight class.
Oh my gosh.
Which is never a good thing. But I figure that's another 5 or 7 pounds the guy will have on me. No big deal. What the coach didn't tell me is I'd be wrestling against the state champ. And this guy, he looked 3 times my size, mostly because of his muscle mass. And he was just beating the heck out of me throughout the match. But he couldn't pin me, and he should have pinned me pretty quick. But I was kind of spry. And I think he got frustrated. He literally pulled a WWE move, picked me up, and slammed me down on the ground. He was that big and that strong. Well, it turns out you can't do that. And when he did that, I bit through my tongue.
Oh,
yeah, that hurt. A lot of blood, too. And I broke a rib. It wasn't devastating injury, but it wasn't very pleasant. Coach comes out and the ref talks to the coach, says, all right, that's a disqualifying move. The other guy's unstraps his chin strap and he's got his hands on his hips, like, yeah, I really shouldn't have done that. And coach looks at me and goes, John, you have a choice. You can accept the win by disqualification of the competitor, or you can go back on the mat and wrestle. And I just looked at him with the blood and I got the ice on the head. I pulled to my ribs. I just looked and I said, I would like to win. So they took us out of the mat, and that was maybe the low point of it all. That you got to hold each hand, and then he raises my hand as the winner. I tell you, Rocky at the end of his match looked in way better shape, I think, than I did then. That was sadly the highlight of my wrestling career. Sometimes you don't need to keep fighting. Take the victory when you can.
Take your victory when you can. And maybe the other one is don't wrestle up every time you get a chance. I know you and your father bonded over football, specifically Notre Dame football. You're 7 years old. First big game you get a chance to appreciate with your dad is Notre Dame versus Alabama. And you've got the gold helmet up there over your shoulder that you and your father actually spray painted together. Is that right?
We did. It's memories in life. And it was the Sugar Bowl, 1975, Notre Dame, Alabama. And I didn't want to watch it. I didn't like watching sports at 7 years old. My dad, like a lot of Irish Americans, a lot of the Notre Dame subway alums, my dad never went to college. My dad never stepped foot in South Bend, but was a huge Notre Dame fan. And he said, no, let's just watch a little bit of it. And so I watched it and I kind of got into it. And by the end, the Irish won. If I recall, it was like 13-11. It was a real defensive struggle. That's how long ago it was. Notre Dame beat Alabama. And I said, Dad, I love those helmets, the way they were shining on the lights. He said, well, let's go get one tomorrow. We went out to a Sears in Hackensack, New Jersey. And we looked, and there was this kind of a row of generic helmets. I said, well, Dad, those aren't the gold ones. No, that's the deal. We're going to spray paint it together, just like they do every night before a Notre Dame game. And we did. We bought the gold spray paint. We went home and we spray painted it. We painted that, I guess, on January 2nd, 1975. That helmet has always had great meaning for me for a number of reasons. 10 days later, my dad died in a car accident on duty as a police officer. That helmet and those memories, and, people ask, where do you get your fondness for Notre Dame? I think that's kind of all connected, and adversity makes us stronger, I guess. But part of the lesson there is just cherish the memory and the legacy.
After your father's passing, you wanted to continue to play Little League baseball. You wanted to continue to stay active in sports. And it was the community of other police officers that helped make that possible for you. Can you tell me a little bit about those men and women and what you learned through that community?
Yeah, so my dad died in January 1975. Tough time for family, for me, for my younger brother. Bergenfield back then had some of the very best Little League teams. I think that year or two later, they went to the Little League World Series championship against Taiwan. It was, they were a remarkable team, if I recall. So you got to try out for the Little League. You just couldn't sign up. I think they threw 5 or 10 pitches. I missed every one. I tried to catch a few balls, and I just wasn't very good. Whether it was because I didn't have a dad to help prep me for it or not, I don't know. But I found out I didn't get selected. Wasn't going to play Little League. And I think there was like a backup league you can join or something. So I was going to sign up for that. And then I remember maybe a week or so later, coach coming over, and he had like a shopping bag, and it was a uniform. And it said they had a second draft, and I was selected in the second draft, and I'd be on the team. And I thought that was great. And I had the uniform. And then I remember going to the games. My mom was always there. My grandfather was always there. But I remember a number of different police officers who were always there, and whether they're hanging around the dugout or standing behind the batting cage, watching me generally miss the ball. None of them ever said anything. Few of them came up to me. I think it was that level of support to fill in, whether you call it the brotherhood, the sisterhood now, whatever it may be. I had no idea about any of this and couldn't even piece it together when I was young. But looking back on it, was an incredibly powerful moment of support, love. I tend to believe, Don, that love proves itself in deeds, and I think those deeds were many.
Yep.
This is the helmet that my dad and I painted.
That's it.
Megan, her senior year, they have the regular senior portraits on campus. Megan, of course, wasn't satisfied with that. So Megan, of course, hires her own private photographer for a 2-day shoot all over campus in South Bend. She and I think Father John and maybe Coach Kelly get to go everywhere they want on this campus. So she just strolled right onto the center of the football field, took a picture in a jersey holding this helmet, and surprised me with the picture.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
That is as beautiful a full circle moment as it gets right there. You know, fitness and being physically your very best has been important to you throughout life, including your service to our country. I know that the military taught you a lot about fitness. It is, in fact, it's a quote I've read from you in a couple of different places where you talked about the importance about the military's commitment to fitness and how it became important to you as you took care of you. You're in business to help take care of others, but you got to take care of you. Tell me about the military's commitment to that concept of your physical fitness and how it plays into what you are able to then do as a leader.
Yeah, early in life, when I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy, and you're getting up before the sun is coming up and it's hot and humid and you're out there running on the field, you realize you're doing it to be in shape because of the demands of the job, the service. And maybe at the time you don't realize it, but you realize that you're doing it to form closer bonds with one another. And you've had some amazing guests on, and you've been able to write about this so beautifully in your career, Don. The elements of sports going beyond the physical into the mind and into the spirit becomes a little bit of muscle memory, I think, physical muscle memory, but also the mental, emotional, maybe even spiritual in some ways, part of the journey in life, having that physical part of it. As I've gotten older, and unfortunately, we tend to have to suffer our way to wisdom in life. So I wished I knew this when I was younger, but have learned it along the way. But also watching, our kids and realizing through them and so many others that we've lived with and worked with who are not able-bodied, who wish they could simply go for a run, go for a walk, play tennis, throw a ball, whatever it may be. There's a deep appreciation and element of gratefulness in being able to physically exert yourself. I kid around when my daughter asked me, "Why are you going for a run? It's cold." You know what, Megan? It's cheaper than therapy. There's a little bit of the me element in it. And look, I was blessed that, after 9/11, I wanted to make a small contribution to the war on terrorism. And I put my hand up to go back in the service. And I did that for almost 11 years as an officer in the Navy Reserve. And with the teams that I worked with in the Joint Special Operations Command, part of the requirement was an extraordinary level of fitness. I was older and I had to work a lot harder at it. I was in my, late 30s, early to mid 40s during that period. But, I had some great folks I worked with. I supported some of the greatest warriors in the world in working with a Navy SEAL team and others. And to see that level of commitment, that fitness, but that mindset more than anything, and that spirit that I have to be among the strongest links in the chain, because if I'm not, I'm going to let down my brothers and sisters.
Hmm.
That to me is a great lesson in the physical fitness aspects of what we did and what I learned in the military. You've got to be as strong a link in that chain as you can be.
Mm. John, we've talked a lot here about sports for you, whether it was your wrestling time, whether it was your passion for football, but you've also served as a great leader. And our nexus point in this podcast, our driver, is that discussion about does sports and your participation and your appreciation of what sports has taught you, has it helped make you a better leader? What are some of the ways that you are better as the person that 500 people look to at your company because of what you've been through and the experiences that you've had through sports?
There's so many lessons, and you've covered them so well over the years in your interviews and your writings. I tried to think, what could I contribute that others haven't? And yes, the discipline, the teamwork, the structure, the motivation, all of that's very true. For me, I think looking back as a mediocre athlete, what I learned more than anything is to accept loss.
Right.
That's going to be part of life. People have said, it's okay to fail. Well, you know what? Of course it's okay to fail. In fact, if you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. You're constantly trying to play up to that competition. And when I was thrown into the middle of the world of biotechnology, I didn't know anything about science and medicine. I had to learn on the job, and that wasn't enough. I ended up hiring in that first year graduate students to teach me genetics and biochemistry and biology and all of that. And I try to draw that analogy to sports. Having, gotten my butt kicked, I won whatever I was playing a fair amount of times, was on great teams sometimes and bad teams and individual sports, probably lost more competitions, games, whatever than I ever won. But boy, what a great preparation in life, but also a necessary preparation in running a biotech company. Because I got to tell you, it is among the hardest jobs you can have. Going from an idea to a molecule to a medicine that works in people to a medicine that ultimately gets approved is a pretty rare feat. You've got to realize you are going to fail in biotech way many more times than you ever succeed. You're going to be way below 500 all the time. But boy, that one out of whatever times you win, I still think it's one of the best jobs you can have.
Life ain't always fair. Get over it. It's how you continue to move on. It's what you pick up and what you do, even where it doesn't appear that things are kind of rolling in your direction. That's really powerful. In another podcast, you said these words: life will have challenges. How you deal with them will determine your level of happiness in life.
Yes.
You defined it, you said happiness in life. Can you talk to me a little bit about how other leaders can begin to adopt that mindset?
It gets back to understanding that as the harder you try and the more difficult the field that you're in, the more likely it is that you're not going to succeed. But then there's also just life events in the world of healthcare and in medicines and in rare genetic medicines, realizing that no one ever did anything to deserve it. No one ever did anything wrong. It's just the way nature turned out. And I've seen this with countless people and friends and family over the years when they get a cancer diagnosis or, in our world, a rare disease diagnosis. The resiliency and the strength and the spirit that people have. And I see that most especially, Don, in children. Maybe that's one of the blessings of this journey. We've met so many amazing people over the years. And in dealing with rare genetic diseases, it is really hard sometimes. You get these diseases where there's no medicines developed and very little hope, and fatal brain diseases in children that we work in. It can get you down. The parents are always so strong for their kids.
Mm.
But then what you see is the kids themselves. They never feel sorry for themselves. You and I have seen it in what we've been blessed to be able to do through our service on the Make-A-Wish board together. Countless wish kids, the joy that you see.
Oh, man.
We've said that when Make-A-Wish gets in your heart, it never leaves. And that's absolutely true. And it's because of the wish kids and what we've seen. I've been to and on and seen countless wishes over the years. What I've never seen is a wish kid say, well, yeah, this is great, but darn it, I have cancer. No, they don't,
They don't.
because they live in the moment and they appreciate it. They didn't forget that they've got cancer or rare disease or whatever they may have, whatever they may be struggling with. But they've got this sense of gratefulness and an appreciation and an ability to live in the moment that sometimes we big people forget about.
The two of us have served for a number of years together on the Make-A-Wish National Board. You were the board chair for a period while I was on the board, when I was just joining the board.
Yeah, I remember.
And at the beginning of Make-A-Wish board meetings, you talk about renewing the vision and the importance to doing that within your own company. Well, at Make-A-Wish, they open board meetings with mission moments, right? These opportunities to sit and hear from a family about a wish that's been granted to them and how that impact of that wish changed the dynamic of their family. I'll never forget one day, my third or fourth meeting, I'd cried at every one of these mission moments, right? Because you watch these families, you hear that child say those exact words. It wasn't about whatever I was feeling that day, because that day it was just me, my family, and Mickey Mouse, or
Yeah.
me, my family, and whatever.
Yeah.
And the lights come up and I'm crying a little bit and I'm sitting next to you and I said, gosh, do we ever stop crying at these meetings? And you looked at me and you said, if you stop crying, you should get off the board.
Mm.
And that really hit me because I realized that if we're going to be mission driven, if we're going to be constantly in the renewal of our vision, if we're going to pick a way or an organization that should have that kind of grip on our soul, the day we can do it dry eyed is the day we should probably stop.
Exactly right.
I'm sure just from talking to people that work with you that that's the way it feels working with you every day. You bring that life to everything that they get a chance to experience because you're constantly renewing their sense of purpose, you're renewing their mission.
Thank you, Don, for that. And again, we're just so blessed to have Make a Wish be such an important part of our lives. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You've got to give everybody in your organization a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves, no matter what they do. There's the classic John Kennedy quote to the janitor at NASA when he asked him, "What do you do here?" And the custodian said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon, sir." Whatever it may be, whatever it may be, that sense of purpose, building companies is important. Companies build families, families build communities, and to have vibrant, sustainable businesses, teams, organizations, it's kind of the essence of society.
Well, I love what you are building there. I have asked every guest this question, and I can't wait to hear your response. A lot of people use, especially in the corporate world, talk about their organizations as teams. Truth is that we know that most of them really aren't teams. They're a bunch of individual contributors and sometimes even competitors within an organization who just might happen to have the same business card. You know what it means to build a team. I mean, I love the way you're asking each of the people that work for you whether or not they're a passionate entrepreneur and can they actually articulate that. But if you were trying to counsel an executive on how they can take a group of people and turn them into a great team together, what are some of the ways you would offer that they could help build that bridge to an organization that could do something, as you said, bigger than anything they might be able to do individually?
I've always been a big believer, Don, in the power of dreaming. When we put our first company together, Novozyme, and now our second company, Amicus, and we're about to do it again with a spin-off company called Caritas Therapeutics, the Latin word for compassionate. What we've done in every case is to spend time together, put away the PowerPoint, put away the Excel, put all that away. That'll help form your day-to-day plan, your strategies, all of that. And those are necessary. But go away and dream. Think big. Ask yourself, ask people around you, what do you want this organization to look like in 5, 10, 20 years? And what part of the world is it going to shape? You don't have to change the world. Few people set out to change the whole world, and most who do don't do a very good job at it. For us, it was easy. In the early days, our first company, we wanted to make a medicine to save people living with Pompeii, period. I don't think anybody else had that mission in the world, so we took it on. The next company was broader than that, to make many medicines to save many people living with many rare genetic diseases. So a bigger vision, bigger mission set, if you will. But we did the same thing. We looked out and we said, this is what this company would need to look like. And it was very exciting to dream. Now, the tough part is when you got to go back, and the next part of the exercise I ask people is, okay, that's the dream. Take a day, take 2 days to talk about what that looks like. Now let's talk about the barriers to get there.
Mm.
And oftentimes there are many and they are great. How are we going to break down those barriers? And what do we need to do now from day one? Picture what you want the future to look like, and then identify the barriers. And then you begin to come up with plans, strategies, budgets, organizations to overcome those barriers. I found that to be an incredibly powerful exercise.
Wow. Begin with the end in mind.
And constantly drive to it, no matter the challenge.
Wow. John, I have spent 30 years in journalism asking great champions of their individual spaces if they can identify a habit that's an important part of their daily regimen, something that they've built into who they are that helps establish them and give them a competitive edge. Is there a habit that you've built into your life that's made a difference for you? Something you've done regularly that has allowed you to elevate?
I think what we don't do enough is to take time to think,
Mm.
to take time to reflect, and to take time to be grateful. There's always 1,000 things that we wish could be different in our life or in our day. And sometimes I've struggled with it. But it's to try to find just a little bit of quiet time, whether it's in the morning or for me, it's usually late at night. I just sit back a little bit to think, reflect, meditate, to pray for thanks, to pray for strength, and to pray for grace. To me, those are the most important things.
Mm. Wow. John Crowley, you've inspired a movie. There's some medicines that are changing the world, but today you've inspired me. You've inspired us. And I just want to thank you for your friendship, but I also want to thank you for being a corporate competitor.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for taking the time and thanks for your great friendship.
I don't know how many of you listening have children, but boy, if this concept of, quote, what would you do if a doctor shared that diagnosis with you really hit home to me? I look at John Crowley as my hero today because the way he runs his business and has lived his life. From a business standpoint, I love the way he put it. First, whatever you set out to do, dream big. Once you establish that dream, get real on the barriers, and then build your business plan on how you will overcome those barriers. If you were looking for another sincere and inspirational episode, check out episode 34 with legendary team builder Simon Sinek. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.